I'd like to ask all of my colleagues to introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. I'm Tracey Shelley. I'm the Chief Executive of BCECA, which is a trade association that represents the principal engineering contracting companies, global organisations who are involved in the engineering, procurement, project management and construction of energy and process plant facilities around the world. Pretty.
Thank you, Tracey. I'm Pretty Patel. I work for ACA Solutions. I'm a principal process engineer, predominantly in oil and gas, and I've been in the role with ACA for about a year now.
I'm Lisa Jones. I'm actually from Women on Boards, WB Directors, not Regenerate. I am the chair of Regenerate, but I'm here with my hat on representing WB Directors. We as an organisation want to support underrepresented groups and minorities succeed in the organisations that they're working in. So what strategies, what sort of tips, tricks, information do they need to enable them to get the career success that they want? We do that in a number of ways, but the primary way that we do it is encourage everyone to think about taking on board roles at whatever stage of the career they're at. So that's from very young to mid-career to later career, is inspiring people to build their career leadership potential by taking on board roles early. So it's with that hat I am on the panel. Thank you for asking me, Tracey.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Saifali Patel. I'm from Bechtel Corporation. I'm a senior HR business partner at Bechtel. It's been nearly 10 years I've been working for them. I am involved in DE&I heavily from the HR perspective, but also I'll volunteer heavily in DE&I initiatives and strategy because that's one of my passions. So I'm also a co-chair of the council at Bechtel, and I'm here looking forward to discuss more on how we support the DE&I.
Very much. And I'm Tolani, Azeez. Good afternoon to all of you. And just want to say, first of all, thanks to Tracey and BCECA for giving us an opportunity to talk about DE&I. I work at Fluor Corporation. I'm actually an executive director. And 2 years ago, we took on the first role of having a global executive director of diversity, equity and inclusion. And I've been leading up that office for the last 2 years. And I look forward today to sharing with you our trials, tribulations, successes and failures as we go through this discussion. Thank you, Tracey.
Lovely. Okay, so before we get on to the panel discussion, I wanted to just set the scene so that you have an understanding of where we're coming from in our discussion. So BCECA represents engineering contracting companies, and we've been in existence for almost 60 years, and we've seen a dramatic change in the industry in that period. When BCECA was set up, we were set up by 4 British companies who were predominantly male-dominated engineering companies. Nowadays, our members are global organisations, and they recruit mainly at graduate level, and at that level they are very diverse, both in terms of ethnicity and also gender. But what we see is that as you look through the organisation up towards the senior levels, the diversity diminishes. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about today. We want to look at the challenges, and we want to look at the solutions, and to see whether there are ways that you can make global organisations fully inclusive and diverse. So, firstly, we're going to talk about the challenges that exist. So, Lisa, you're going to kick us off to talk about some of the challenges from your viewpoint.
So I think the biggest challenge is data. What gets measured gets managed. We always say that, don't we? But you need to know what's going on in the organisation. And I would say you need to know what's going on in the organisation right from the top, right to the bottom. So what's the composition of the board like? What's the composition of the senior exec team? You spoke about, obviously, we can recruit for diversity at the lower levels of an organisation. So that's often an easier challenge to solve. But it's like, well, what's happening at the top? What's happening at the bottom? But then what's happening in the middle? So what we tend to see in organisations is that middle bit is sticky. So we can change the numbers by recruitment and looking at our recruitment processes, but you need to know what's going on. For me, a DE&I program, the challenge is it's about a transformation project. You're looking at a culture and saying, how do we shift that culture? So, you can't just have a few women's networks. You've got to have sort of like a strategic plan, and that comes from the top, it comes from the board. So we don't want a board that's paying lip service to D&I. We want a board that's got a strategic plan and understands the challenges that organisation is facing. And you need to be actively engaging with your stakeholders, because the challenges and issues that are faced for, say, diverse individuals in Europe may be different to that in Africa, EMEA, wherever. So I want to know what's going on in the organisation. I want to know data from the top to the bottom, looking at what's happening to the talent pipeline. When does that drop off? Why is it dropping off? How are the promotion processes working within the organisation? How are the recruitment processes working in the organisation? And what tactics and strategies are being employed to address what that data is telling you? So for me, how can you put in metrics? How can you create change? How can you create a transformation program unless you understand the data and you understand the culture of your organisation? And you kind of got to set up, once you know where you are, you can then work out where you want to get to and how you're going to get there. Without that, you're just paying lip service to D&I programs, is what I would say.
Yeah, thanks for that. Tolani, in your role over the last 2 years where you've had this global lead position, what are the challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, thanks, Tracey. It's a great question. And I also build on what Lisa said about the data. Not that the data isn't there, because most of you come from amazing organisations and you collect the data. It's about understanding and responding to that data. Do you want to do anything about the data? So I agree with you, that's a challenge. But from my perspective, when I took on this role, and I've always called it both a challenge and a privilege, the biggest challenge was the fear people had when I walked in the room thinking, I'm about to lose my job because I'm not a diverse category and you may not want me anymore. So one of the bigger issues for diversity, equity and inclusion is that it means different things to different people. But the biggest challenge was confirming it's about inclusion for everybody who's capable of doing the job. And until you get that message across, you will often come across resistance because people think, you don't care about me anymore, I'm not your priority, or I'm not a diverse group that you may be trying to promote. Absolutely, it's not about that, but that is a real identification with DE&I, and I've seen that across the globe. So I would say that for me, that has been one of my biggest challenges in taking on this role. Thanks, Tracey.
Saifali, you work in a global organisation, but you recognise that there are needs for regional differences. So talk to us about that.
Sure, Tracey. I think Lisa touched on that a little bit, that, being a global organization doesn't mean that we can just have a strategy that fits every country. The diversity needs for each and every region, every country is different. It differs to a lot of levels. So when we're thinking about a strategy to implement for the DE&I, we do need to absolutely be conscious of what are the needs on a regional level by the country, by the region, and how do we support that. So that is one of the challenges by itself, to really have a clear understanding. What works for US will never work for, may not never work for UK or Saudi Arabia, for example. And how do we kind of really understand what do we need to support in that particular country, and how do we kind of build a strategy in implementing that? So I'd say that has been one of the biggest challenges for us when we started our journey, to really understand of how do we put together a strategy that is on a global level, but also effective on a regional level. Lisa also touched on the challenge of data. Data has been also another challenge that we faced at Bechtel, because gender is one of the easiest data that we can easily see because it's visible, right? But all the other diversity dimensions, when you look at it, we are not able to, based on the laws of every country, we can't just ask people to disclose some of the information. So every country has their own strict laws about asking certain characteristics, especially with diversity element. So we faced that challenge when we started looking into data, and we realized that it's not something that we can just ask people to talk about. We will have to have their permission to have that data from that and explain to them that the reason why we'll use the data, as Lisa explained, that helps us understand what does it look like in each region, what are the needs of each particular dimension, and how do we formulate our strategy for each region. So that has been one of the challenges that we've gone through in explaining people about why we are focusing in DE&I. And we started our journey with making sure from the top level, the executive level, people, all these support is provided towards DE&Is. They all are on board to understand why DE&I is going to be important for us to drive everything we do in HR, whether it's onboarding people, keeping people, retaining people, promoting people, everything DE&I touches. And if we want to foster a culture of care and inclusivity, we need to absolutely have a strategy that touches and make sure that everybody feels interested. So I think that's kind of a challenge that we on a global level face. And for us, it doesn't mean that we need to have a global strategy that will work. We have to be mindful of what will work on a regional level as well.
Yeah. And Tracey, you're at ACA. You are looking at a local strategy.
That's right. What I failed to mention earlier was I'm chair of the UK Cultural Inclusion Committee. So at ACA Solution, we have just recently boarded the train for DE&I in terms of having sort of committees in place. Some of our other BCECA company colleagues will be ahead of us, and it's not a race to get to the end. It's a journey, and we're at the start of our journey. So in the UK, we've got 3 committees: neurodiversity, cultural inclusion, and gender. So in the UK, it's slightly different, like you said. And again, like Lisa mentioned as well, we've got the data, but it's how do we use that data? In Brazil, our offices, they're way ahead of us in the journey. So the challenges for us is not to try and catch up with any of our other sort of BCECA members, but to sort of embrace the journey that we're on currently.
Okay, so looking forward at some of the solutions, some of the things that have been implemented, some of the things that maybe we think should be implemented. Tolani, tell us about the generation pipeline.
Absolutely. This is something that's really dear to my heart, because when we looked at the famous data, what we found was that one of our areas of diversity, which was accessible on a global basis, is what we call generation diversity. And when you look at that mix, and we did it on a macroeconomic level, so we went to UNESCO's numbers and the World Bank numbers, and we looked at it internally. We were looking at that pipeline coming through of the famous Gen Y and Gen Z, as they say in the United States, is important for 2 reasons. 1, everybody needs a pipeline. 2, the characteristics of that pipeline was exactly the place where you wanted to start to take the DE&I journey. You have great gender diversity, even in our sphere, which is engineering, where you normally across the globe have about 30% or less women versus 70% men, sometimes greater percentage of men. When you look at the generation coming through of new hires, you looked at the data, it's well over 45% in some areas. So we know that the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys carry through more ethnicity diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity. They have a very different way of thinking about the workplace. And to us, we see that as one of the ways in which we can overcome the challenges, not by having all Gen Y and Gen Zs, but by mixing your teams to have generation diversity amongst the teams that you choose for your projects, the people that you put on the boards, the candidates that you select for interviews, and the people that you promote within your teams. So to me, generation diversity is one of the areas in which you can unlock DE&I both on a global and on a regional basis. Thanks, Tracey.
Thank you. Lisa, talk to us a bit more about the need for flexibility.
Well, I think we've all agreed that one approach doesn't fit all markets. So I think you need to know what's going on and respond accordingly and have different strategies in place for different markets and address the different issues and the different stages that they're at. So in terms of solutions, once you kind of work that out, geographical regions, looked at the data, I think it's about putting programs in place, but it's got to be multifaceted because you've got to appeal to the majority and the minority. So we know that diversity makes us smarter. So we know that we need different thoughts, different views, different opinions around the table to make decision making better. That's kind of the point of this. The business case is very evident. So if diversity makes us smarter, that's great. We can introduce that into the organisation, but that doesn't mean that means we've got a diverse, sort of like equitable organisation. What it means what we've got to do is make sure that those teams are collaborative. So it's about bringing in the diversity, but it's about increasing collaboration, and that starts at senior levels. Diversity makes us smarter. You need to do different things for different markets, but you need to create education and training around collaboration, around inclusivity. So people simply know how to run things differently so everybody feels included and everybody understands that somebody who's different to them, that they should remain curious. We should all remain curious and slightly out of our comfort zones to think, okay, it's interesting that you've got a different opinion to me because your different opinion might make a better decision around the table. We don't tend to do that naturally for all sorts of reasons, through stereotypes, through unconscious biases, through our own experience. So we need to create a culture that enables that, and that will be different for different organisations in different regions. But for me, that's one thing that we need to be doing, is about collaborative cultures, and that's about giving people the tools and the techniques that they need to engender collaborative meetings, collaborative cultures. I could go on really, but I think there's a brilliant example actually from, I'm going to forget the organisation now. They did this piece of research into CEOs and what made a brilliant CEO. And there's a CEO who works for an organisation called Reckitt Benckinsale, and all he did was introduce his secret ingredients, his secret sauce to change the culture of his organisation. And he had a very prescriptive method to how meetings ran, that everybody was included, everybody had to speak up, and it changed the culture of that organisation. And why? Because it was inclusive, it was collaborative, it meant that everybody was involved in the decision-making process. So you kind of got to figure out what works in your organisation, what works in your different regions, but creating structures to change the culture that create inclusion and collaboration is really important. That's kind of one level. I'd also say that you need employee resource groups. You need things like networks. You need the underrepresented groups to have that sense of belonging around people who are like them. But you can't just do that, because you also need intersectionality between those groups. You can't just siphon everybody off into their own separate group. What you need to do is get those groups to work together and for everybody to appreciate the difference that that other person brings. So you need structures and systems in place to also enable that. So it's not just, you can't just say, we'll do this and it's going to work. It has to be much more multidimensional than that, is sort of what I see working.
I'm sorry, I do talk a lot, I've been told, but Lisa, that's great comments, and just leaning in on that. You do need to lean in and lean out. So we talked earlier, as well as organisations like ours changing the way we do collaborative meetings, making sure people feel involved or included, and they don't have to speak up because they may, for example, in some of our offices, be reluctant to speak up, but we give them an opportunity to contribute. We're also asking our employees to lean in themselves. So where you may have felt before that you were excluded for any reason, we're encouraging them to psychological safety to speak up or to raise their hand or to put forward an email and say, would you mind if I tried this meeting? I've not done it before, but I'd like to be given an opportunity. So the important thing about DE&I is not to beat yourself up and say we've been doing it wrong or we've excluded people, but to understand it's a two-way street of collaboration. And what we do know is that it does lead to more successful results. It's been very, very interesting to watch, and I never believed it before I watched and saw the results. Back to you, Lisa and Tracey.
We, one of the things that we do know is the importance of leadership and leaders. So, Saifali, talk to us about Bechtel and the importance of the leadership.
Sure.
The E&I.
Sure. I think leadership support into the whole D&I journey is absolutely important. We need to have their support to understand why we are on this journey and how it is important for the whole company to have diversity as well as inclusion. Along with the leadership, I think we did realize that for us it's always important to also have that understanding across the whole company. So it's not just the leadership, but also all the employees equally understanding why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Why is diversity and inclusion so important for us to be committed towards it? So when we started our journey, we started with raising the whole awareness around this piece and explaining to our employees, our leaders of what is the concept of diversity and inclusion, why is Patel going into this journey, and why we are committing to it. And that helped us to make sure everybody understands and are aligned in terms of what we are trying to achieve through the whole D&I journey. The other important stakeholders for us is our business resource group, which Lisa touched on a little bit. We have 7 business resource group, and we are establishing 8th one this year. Business resource group really is a community of employees that come together representing particular diversity dimension. They are very important for us in order for us to understand what that particular community needs, what are the needs of that particular diversity that we as business can support. And they become that voice of employees to us. And similarly, they become our voice to the employees. So whenever we are launching a strategy, initiative, or any event, we are leveraging our business resource group, and we are through them communicating with our employees. And also at the same time, each and every business resource group has a senior leadership sponsoring them. So they have the support from leadership, not just financially, but also guiding them in kind of explaining what they should be doing and just giving that support that makes them comfortable in leading whatever efforts they want to do for diversity and inclusion. That has helped us big time in making sure we have that constant dialogue between the leadership as well as the employee resource group that feeds through the employees to show that we are committed towards diversity and inclusion. So for us, leadership as well as the business resource group are very, very important. They work together very well, and our strategy is really formed from whatever feedback we get out of the business resource group when they tell us this is what our needs are, and that helps us understand where our focus should be.
Yeah. Tracey, you talked earlier about resource groups within ACA, and I think one of the things that you've mentioned previously is about the importance of role models and having people there.
Yes, you're right. Role models in any aspect of life are helpful. In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need those role models, whether they're within the company or outside of the company. We sort of look towards who can help us get to where we, as an individual, as an employee, want to be as part of our career or are part of the company. Where does the company want to go? Same with what Saifali said. Our leaders, our executives need to be role models to the rest of the company as well, so we can look up to them, but also treat them and treat our employees as equals as well. Being a Norwegian company, we tended to think that we all treated equal, but we sort of see that just because we look different or behave different, we're not necessarily equal. So in that aspect, and that's why we've kind of joined the party as such to DEI later than some of our other colleagues.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do now is just explore some of the successful initiatives that have been implemented within our industry, to look at the positives and things that we can learn and take forward, and perhaps other organisations can benefit from. So, Tolani, do you want to tell us about some of your successes?
Never shy to say a word, Tracey. Thank you for inviting me. It's one of the things we did at Fluor, and it built upon what the panel has been saying, is we took the regional and the global role. So we have a global framework of DE&I, and actually a statement from our CEO saying what they'd like to achieve in the company, but we took it on a regional basis. And we took our executives, 11 executives, all the way across from China, all the way across to Peru and Chile, and they all have an inclusion council that serves their region with representatives from the offices in that region and from the business lines and from the employee resource groups. And they act almost like mini boards. They're maybe not as efficient as some boards, but they bring back those voices through the executives for that region, and those regional leads all meet twice a year with the CEO and share what they've heard, what they've achieved, what their challenges are. Now, why is that important? Because you're getting employee engagement and employee feedback through DE&I. And those are two fundamentals for any business. If you've ever got people, you're always going to need to have some form of employee engagement if you want to drive high performance. So through the DE&I framework, we've actually untapped so many other resources, which is giving us collaboration, employee feedback, employee engagement, but also an opportunity to say how we can help groups who may be feeling excluded and make them all feel included. So that's been one of our unexpected successes across Fluor, and I do think it's a great model, and I'm sure we'll be looking at it, but it's certainly worked for us in 2022 and 2023. Thanks, Tracey.
Shefali, how about in Bechtel?
So similar to what Tolani mentioned, we had the same model as well. But in terms of the successes, I'd like to mention one of the things that we've done, which has been very successful in Bechtel, and that's when we were looking at really supporting from the gender perspective. So, Tracey, one of the key challenges with our industry is getting more females on board and having that support in place to make them feel that engineering is a career that they can go into and grow into that career. So for us, attracting females into engineering has been one of the biggest focus areas that we wanted to put a lot of effort into. And in order to kind of do that, awareness was one of the things, but one initiative that has been kind of launched on a global level was in partnership with Catalyst. It's a company that helps support raising this whole awareness around from the gender perspective and bringing men on board as an allies to females. Through their model, the way it worked, we have to have dialogue teams where employees come together. So we have a mix of male and female that come together and they talk about some of the key things that are challenging from a woman's perspective. And as well as from male perspective, and bring them together. And when that dialogue happens, and it's a natural way of discussing, we give them a topic, like for example, microaggressions, and how microaggressions can be a challenge from both perspectives. And both male and female talk about that in their day-to-day work environment, how that is a challenge. And that helps foster a behavior change, which we have seen over the year that we've been it's been 2 years that we are doing this, and at the end of the 1 year that we did it, we started seeing changes in how people think about the challenges females have when they are growing in their careers. And we saw that men started to understand the challenges and where they can equally support females. And that has been one of our biggest successes, because we now have male allies who are willing to support and understand how with them changing their behavior can help to their female colleagues. So for us, I think Mock Dialogue has been our biggest success, and we still continue to roll that out as we get new people on board. We think it has really helped us change that shift in culture and bring them all into that journey of understanding the challenges female feel.
Okay. Pretty. Obviously, ACCA, as you say, are still fairly early on in their journey. So, what successes are you able to tell us about?
Okay, so the current project I'm on, BE&I, the project is predominantly out of Oslo and Mumbai, and we did a project-wide cultural day with the teams where we explored each other's culture. So Norwegian culture is different to Indian culture, and we looked at what the positives were from each culture, how we could use that in our project, but also how we could learn to work together as well. What works well, what doesn't work well, to understand other people's cultures. And I sat in on that day where being a British person and could see the differences between the two. And when I showed them examples, for example, the Mumbai team, they would ask their direct report to order food for them, whereas I would just order my food, and it's like I'm not waiting for someone to order my food for me. Or the Norwegian people would just trust everybody. You know, that their culture is different, but just to understand everyone is different. But if we want to work together and be successful as a team, we need to understand how each one works and how we can leverage and work better.
Yeah. Okay. Tracey, you obviously are from outside of our sector, but are very focused on how we move people through the organisation and up into those senior roles. So can you talk to us about some of the successes?
Yeah, so I think there's a big drive at the minute across different industries about getting people to own their own careers. So we're talking about change management programs. It takes quite a while to shift a culture. So when you've got those people, you want to retain your best talent. There's a war on talent. So you've got good people who are joining your organisation, you want to keep them. So we want to inspire those people to think about managing their own careers. So we want people to stay authentic. We want them to be absolutely who they are, but take responsibility. So the culture is what the culture is. They individually are probably not going to change that culture. That's part of a top-down kind of strategy. So take responsibility to say, okay, given this is the landscape and this is where I am, how do I navigate myself from where I am and where to where I want to be? And there's definitely, for underrepresented groups, key things that they can do in terms of successful strategies to get them to that next level of leadership. And I'll be brief, and we could probably have a whole debate just on these things, but things around being visible is really, really important for minorities. If you think you're really, really good, you're going to join an organisation at a junior level and work really, really, really hard and get promoted, you're not. You need to be visible. People need to know who you are. Having people who will sponsor you and support you in the organisation really matters, and they're only going to do that if you're visible. So talking, being honest about the stuff that matters, being visible matters, specifically if you're in an underrepresented group. Finding your voice. How do you speak up? How do you let people know who you are? How do you find your voice in meetings? Specifically if you're the only single minority in that group, nobody else in the meeting looks like you. How do you also do things like create influence? When you join an organisation, you look up and you think, gosh, my aspiration, my ambition is to sit at that very senior role, but there is nobody in that organisation that looks like you. What strategies, techniques do you need to employ to enable you to get there? And understanding the culture, understanding the landscape, understanding the two things I've said, but also understanding influence. Who are the people of influence in your organisation? How do you draw yourself alongside them? How do you create your network that will support you, that will enable you to make those career progressions that you need? The other thing I would say, in addition to sort of plotting and managing your executive career, the other thing I would say is build your career leadership potential, take on non-exec roles outside of your industry, outside of your company, that will give you real career benefits. Because all of those things that I've talked about, taking on external roles and sitting on boards, even if it's a charity board, even if it's a sports board, something different to your industry, It will build your career leadership potential. It will give you a point of difference on your CV. So I think it's about taking responsibility for our careers, thinking about tactics, strategies to enable us to get where we want to get to, given the cultures we find ourselves in.
I think we've probably got a few minutes to take any questions that there might be from the audience. Oh, we've got a microphone coming. Okay.
Hello, interesting discussion. Thank you very much. Just listening to the conversation today, it seems to be that you're speaking entirely about working on DEI issues within organisations. Shouldn't DEI perhaps transcend organisations into, working with your clients, working with your suppliers, and I just don't hear a lot of conversation about topics that sort of work more widely on DEI topics. Do you have anybody that'd like to comment on that?
Of course. Let me go quickly first. Great question. Yeah, we actually do a lot of supplier diversity, particularly in our United States offices. So we look for suppliers who are not on our list, that may be from minority groups, women-owned businesses, minority holdings, LGBTQ owners, and we go to outreach programs and we try and bring them into our big major global projects and support them to get started. So it's been very successful on some of our projects in the United States, and it opens up our teams' minds to thinking differently about who do you go to get our materials and resources. But it's just a starting point. It needs to get better. But I think it's a great point that if you're going to do DE&I, you should do it across the board and across all of your stakeholders. Tracey, maybe someone else has a comment on that.
I would totally agree.
Yeah, I'll just add to it. I think that's a great point. It's been something that has been highlighted. I mean, Bechtel applied for ISO certification, D&I certification, and when we went through the audit, that was one of the things that the auditor did mention to us. We do have certain policies from a D&I perspective that we do expect our suppliers and clients and them to meet as well. But I think there is still a long way for us to do a lot more towards getting everybody to be on the same page. So I do know, working with our government clients, that the government clients are pushing for diversity and inclusion in all levels. So that kind of helps us to drive it as well. But I think there is, yes, a lot more work to do to get everybody on board.
Yeah, I think we're in a sector that's very much driven by the clients, and therefore they often set the tone for how that project is going to operate. So we have a lot of work to do to actually educate our clients and encourage them to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
Okay, question here at the front.
Has the panel explored opportunities with technology in terms of artificial intelligence? We had some great panel discussion with respect to metaverse, Web3, AI. Has the panel at all explored opportunities with AI and making sure that AI and machine learning can ensure that part of the organization are not dropping into black box?
Can I go ahead? Oh, what a surprise. Yes, so a great question as well. Yes, we've looked at some organisations in recruitment who used AI to do selection based upon skill sets rather than based upon your organisation that you worked for, where you went to university, or ethnic background. It's coming with mixed results. I think it's come a long way, but we are still exploring whether that alone will allow us to drive an interview panel or a selection of our candidates. So we're at the beginning. We can see some benefits. We are just proceeding with caution when it comes to dealing with individuals and selection processes.
Yeah, I think we have the same experience. We started implementing blind CVs approach, as they say, again removing all the information from which can disclose a person's particular diversity dimension, and really just helping us focus on what the skill set the person is bringing on. That has been working well. It took a while for people to get the hiring managers to get it used to not seeing names, not seeing background information, but it is kind of helping us, making sure we are using that element to drive the diversity and inclusion. Recently, I came across one of the things which we are looking at, kind of implementing it. That's from a disability standpoint. We were informed about there is a VR headset available, which kind of helps us understand if we are dealing with somebody who has, for example, autism, how that person actually feels, person with autism, how the world is according to them. And that is a very interesting concept, and I'm very interested in seeing how that can help us to change that mindset of managers when they're dealing with somebody who has autism. I think being in that person's shoes helps them understand how to help the other person. So for us, that's going to be an important thing that we're looking into to see how we can help people with that kind of diversity that needs that support. So there is AI is definitely something that we'll explore.
Okay. We've come to the end of our time. I wasn't sure whether we were going to do another question or not, but I think one final question. Okay.
So one of the most difficult issues with DE&I is equity, and specifically the definition of equity. And none of you really identify your individual definition of equity within each of your initiatives. I'm curious what that might be for each.
Tolani?
Yes, sir. I was happy to go ahead, and it's a great question. The equity E is always a bit of a hidden E. So the equity to us is not about charity, it's not about I'm helping you because you can't help yourself. It's about making sure everybody has an equal starting point. So everybody has equal access to the opportunities, and where some people may need to have, for example, additional training, may need to have additional coaching to make that available so that you have an equal setting. So we actually have a diagram, the very famous diagram of 3 people on bicycles at different heights to say, you can give everybody a bicycle, but if someone's too short or too tall, that bicycle is not going to help them to get to the finish line. You may need to adjust that bicycle to meet their circumstances so that everybody has an equal start and an equal opportunity. So that's what equity means to us at Fluor. So let me hand over to you, Shelley, Bechtel.
Yeah, I know. I remember exactly the same thing.
Diagram.
That's exactly what we were promoting during the International Women's Day, right? It comes about because the theme this year was around equity. So when we have to explain, that's exactly what we kind of demonstrate, that it's about understanding what the need of the person is and giving that the platform to the level that helps them become equal with everybody else. So for us, it's the same thing, giving that platform, understanding the differences and making it equal for everybody.
Yeah. I think you can bring in a lot of diversity, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody feels equal. And it's balancing that, so everybody feels that the opportunities available to them in the organisation are the same, and they're not being held behind just because they're from an underrepresented group or they're different. So it is definitely about equality for me, and you feeling that the opportunity is there, irrespective of your background.
For me, I think as a Norwegian company, we try to treat everybody equally, and that comes back to the trust I was talking about. So it's not been a discussion point at the moment, but thank you for your question. I think I'll take that back and see how that equity is now included in the organisation.
Good question.
Very good question.
Okay. So I think one of the things that we can say is that diversity, equity and inclusion, it's a journey, and you don't necessarily come to the end of that journey, and we're all at different stages along that journey. And one of the things that we do know is that one size is not going to fit all. Mm-hmm. We have to have differences, we have to take into account all of the differences within our organisations, whether that's to do with culture, whether that's to do with gender, whether that's to do with disability. We can see that we're making progress. We still have a long way to go, particularly with gender. We know that within our sector there's a lot of work to do, but we know that our companies are on that journey and are open to change, which I think is a really good thing. So thank you to everybody for participating, and I hope everybody's found it useful.
Thank you.